Hi everyone, my name's Justin Odisho, and in this Photoshop tutorial, I'm going to show you guys how to edit a raw photo in the Camera Raw plugin. So I guess it's more of a Camera Raw tutorial, but it's a plugin that's part of Photoshop. So whenever you open a raw file, this is the menu that will pop up in most newer versions, and this is called Camera Raw. And in this menu, you see a pretty simple to look at setup. So you got your photo. You've got some information about the photo in the top right corner, like the histogram, the shadows and the highlights and the colors and all that. And then you can also see some data about the actual photo. So you could see that this was taken at a f-stop of 4 at 1/800th of a second shutter speed and ISO 125 and the millimeter in lens. So that can kind of clue you in on maybe what needs to be done if it had a really high ISO and stuff like that when you're editing and fixing the photo. I'm not going to go through every single button and tool. I'm just going to spend this tutorial to teach you guys the most essential and basics of editing and retouching a photo in Camera Raw. So here's a pretty plain and simple photo that was just shot on auto mode with a Canon PowerShot G7X Mark II. Which is a pretty great little point and shoot. See, it's got 20 megapixels. It's not a bad photo. And since we shot in RAW, we have all this data to manipulate. So let's just start from the top here. We're working here on the basic tab, and white balance is just essentially where white is. So you can change the temperature of this to be warmer or cooler, and you can also choose from these presets like as shot, which is how it was recorded in the camera, or you could do auto, daylight, etc. I find that these presets never really get it just right, so after you find one that's close to how you like it, you can tweak it with the sliders. In this case, it's actually pretty accurate like that. You don't really want to use tint to colorize a photo too much. I know sometimes like the green can look cool, but I'm going to show you how to do that later in the split toning menu. So once you have some even and normal white balance colors, then you can edit the exposure, contrast, and all that. Now most of these are pretty self-explanatory as well, so I'll just show you my thought process on how I'm going to edit this photo. So typically you want to start off with the exposure, because that's the one thing that might be wrong when you're shooting on auto mode, or you might not have gotten right in the camera. So in this case, I know that the clouds look interesting and I want to bring out some texture in them, and I know that it's a little bit dark on the bottom, so I want to bring that up. So instead of messing with the exposure too much, because it's kind of right in the middle, I'm going to adjust the shadows and highlights bars. So the shadows I'm going to bring up a little bit, and the highlights I'm going to bring down. So you can see that just brings out the detail of both. And then to counteract some of that grayness that happens when you reduce the contrast between the highlights and the shadows, I'm going to boost the contrast slider. Now most of what goes into editing and post-processing a photo well is just keeping an eye on the photo and testing out what the different sliders look like, not by random, but by knowing what the sliders do and testing out maybe -20 or -19 looks better, and just keeping a good eye on it. A good way to compare your progress on the photo to the original, and this is one of the best tools of Camera Raw, is this before and after view, which is this button right here. You can also press Q on your keyboard, and this will cycle between different before and after modes. You could have it split in half, or side by side, and up and down. So I always use that mode to kind of compare if I'm headed in the right direction or if it's starting to look worse. You can also press P on the keyboard or press this button right here to toggle to before and after settings, which is another way you can kind of see what direction you're going in. So in this case, I think it's looking a lot better already. So a few final sliders you can adjust are the clarity, vibrance, and saturation. So many people have a tendency to just want to turn the clarity all the way up. It looks kind of crazy and you see it on Instagram. Don't let me tell you what not to do, but take it a little easy on the clarity slider. It's really easy for it to become cheesy looking. So I'll just boost it about 30 there. Gives it a little bit more contrast and strength in the shadows and highlights. Next up, you have vibrance. Now, this isn't exactly saturation because you see if I pull it all the way down, you can still see some of that red and blue in the flag. It's more of boosting the majority of the colors or desaturating the colors that aren't so strong. So sometimes if you just want to desaturated and moody look, you can turn the vibrance down, and it does a good job of keeping some colors strong and graying out some others. But in this case, I kind of want to go for that colorful look because the photo isn't too interesting otherwise. So I can also test around with boosting the saturation up or down. You don't want to go too crazy with that either because then things can start to look unnatural. So I'll leave it right around there. Again, you can toggle on and off to see how things are looking. I think things are looking way better already. Now, since this is a basics camera raw tutorial, I'm going to show you some other sliders you can get into. So there's the basic tab here. Then there's also the tone curve. This is just essentially the curves adjustment tool, which you can use to adjust the contrast even more fine-tuned. Well, I'm not going to do too much on the curve, but one thing you can do is head over to split toning. Now here you can introduce some color in the highlights and shadows. So the saturation is kind of like the strength of the effect, and the hue is pretty much what color you want to pick. So let's do this greenish blue color, and then for the shadows, let's pick something darker. So let's do like blue, see what it looks like when we turn the saturation up. So you pretty much, again, you want to experiment with this type of stuff, and you don't want to go too overboard. That's looking a bit overboard. I'm going to turn it down, and you could choose for the balance to be more towards the highlights or shadows. If you want to see if it looks better just on this tab, not overall, you can use this button here, toggle between current settings for the visible panel only. So this is what it looked like before the split toning and after. One last thing that I think is another essential or basic thing to know is in the lens correction menu, make sure you're on the manual tab, and you can add some vignetting to the corners, which sometimes can frame a photo nicely and draw the eye towards the center. So I like vignettes personally. It's a personal choice of taste. So at this point, you could do some final comparisons, see if you want to adjust the exposures anymore or go back and forth with anything. At this point, you can open the photo in Photoshop for further adjustments, cropping, and compositions, or you could save it directly from Camera Raw, or you could just hit done. Photoshop will actually save these settings into a text file, so if you want to open it up later again, it'll still have all the edits onto it. Hopefully you guys enjoyed this. If you did, definitely leave a like below, and if you had any questions or comments, feel free to leave them in the comment box as well. If you guys are looking for more Photoshop and photography tutorials, definitely check out the playlist on my channel and subscribe to my channel to stay tuned for future videos. Thank you guys so much for watching, and I'll see you next time.